right, so this is The New Normal with Ryan Hogarth, powered by Dell. RyanHogarth.com. Artificial intelligence, a great subject. Everyone's talking about it today. It's somewhere in we're high in the hype cycle with artificial intelligence because, well, you can't go a day without hearing about it. And people are saying it's very dangerous. People are saying it's awesome. So somewhere on the scale between Terminator and completely changing the world for the better, everybody's somewhere on that scale. So I thought, let's have a rational conversation about it. There are two sides to artificial intelligence. AI is people-driven. Well, it has to be because it's about our intelligence. But then there is technology that's obviously driving it forward. So I have Simon Carpenter from SAP, who are very involved, who have a deep interest, obviously, in AI and everything technological and in terms of their own future and the future of the world. And Steph Vermeulen, who I guess is a little bit more on the softer side of things, EQ, emotional intelligence, the humanness of this all, because if it's not going to move us forward, if it's not going to move humanity forward, then it probably is a little pointless. So let's start with you, Simon. So AI, why are we even bothering? Why are we making the effort for AI? Why should this even be something concerning us?
Because there's a couple of reasons in my mind. The first is we are sitting today at about 7.6 billion people on this planet. We, depending on whose science you look at, we typically exhaust the natural carrying capacity of our planet by somewhere around the middle of the year. And we're heading towards 11 billion people. We have to get a lot smarter about how we use every single resource on this planet, the water, the air, the people, and everything else. And the problems are so complex and so fast moving that we don't necessarily have the wherewithal in the human brain to process the data fast enough at a scale we need to do it. So that's one answer for artificial intelligence. The other answer is that SAP's purpose is to help the world run better and improve people's lives. And a lot of people's lives are not particularly happy, especially in the working environment. And we think we can take some of the drudge work they do and get machines to do that so we can unlock real human potential.
Okay, well, interestingly there, I thought I'd have a much more focused view on just technology. So it's quite interesting that you've raised the human side of things, or the effort that it should be improving that. So moving on to you, Steph, when I first engaged you and we spoke about doing this episode, I was surprised that you were quite keen on artificial intelligence. I thought you'd be I thought you'd be closer to the side of the scale of the apocalypse is coming, we need to stay away, but you seem to have embraced it, and I'm curious and interested and intrigued to know why.
I think one of the most important reasons why is that since the Industrial Revolution, that what the Industrial Revolution did to human beings is enslave human beings. So with that enslavement, we have a lot of people who hate their Mondays to Fridays. That I think statistics that you were using, Simon, in terms of the 13% only of people are engaged in their jobs. And that's a very small number considering of how many people are employed today. So we prefer our jobs, for example, to when we used to work on the production line, because many people are now using their brains, but not to the degree that we need to. And if we look at what artificial intelligence can do for us, it can take the drudgery out of the work that human beings are doing. And it can get that drudgery work done far more efficiently and far faster than human beings will ever do it. It will also notice error if there are human errors, whether those errors are purposeful or not. If we see people, for example, trying to crook the books, that artificial intelligence will pick it up without then allowing somebody to persuade the machine, well, we're doing this because it's a bit under, and we're trying to, and so the machines will do a far more honest job, as it were, but they'll do a far more mundane job than the human beings will do. One of the things that I read recently was the difficulty of trying to teach artificial intelligence common sense. well, if we can find out how to teach artificial intelligence common sense, maybe we could also instill it in some human beings then. But if we look at what artificial intelligence is doing, there's a lot of talk about hyperhuman skills, so emotional intelligence being one of those, creativity being another. How do we engage with each other as human beings? I think it's going to allow us to bring out more of our humanity. We're so busy trying to actually earn our daily bread, as it were, that most people have forgotten how to live. And I do believe that artificial intelligence, by taking that drudgery away, will allow us to truly live as human beings rather than just exist.
Now one of the things we're bad at, and the human brain is fantastic, and both of you will agree, and there's great arguments about, that it's an incredibly sophisticated tool, but we are bad at certain things. And one of the things we're bad at is sort of unintended consequences, is kind of trying to extrapolate into the future what, if we look at the internet, no one could have seen the rise of Instagram and Facebook and all the crazy things we do with the internet when it was sort of in its infancy in the late 1980s. So with artificial intelligence, and what you're saying is, okay, so it relieves we can be freed from the drudgery of modern life, and maybe we can get back to doing things that are awesome, that are important, that are creative and fantastic.
And human touch.
That's what I'm coming to now is how do we define humanity? Did you watch the documentary on AlphaGo with the deep mind machine that beat the world champion
Go player? No, I didn't watch the actual documentary. But
it's an amazing thing to watch, and I asked Steph to watch it because that, for the first time, you watched that, and I didn't know who to cheer for. On the one hand, I'm going, go machine, that's amazing, what incredible technology. And then I'm seeing this poor guy was almost broken, and I'm going, what does that mean for the future of me and our humanness? I mean, and Simon, I'm gonna ask for your comment on it, because you're a technological guy, but what happens to the humanity in all of this? Do we enhance it with this, or do we question our very existence?
So I don't think we need to question our very existence, because I think ultimately in fact, maybe we do, and I'll come back to that in a second, because ultimately, just to put it out there, in a few billion years' time, our sun is going to explode and crisp the entire neighborhood, okay? So unless we figure out how to do intergalactic travel and to colonize the essence of humanity beyond the solar system, we're all gone in a few billion years anyway. So
we're already on the clock.
just putting that out there, and maybe AI is one of the tools we use to take the essence of humanity and put it out into space. And maybe it's arrogant to think that after 200,000 years we're the pinnacle of evolution. In cosmological time, we have been here the bat of an eyelid.
Yes.
And maybe this genetic, the ultimate expression of our genes translates into silicon, and off we float into space. That's going pretty far out there. You and I don't need to worry about it. Right now, I think for me, the real issue is this, and Steph touched on it just now. The Industrial Revolution gave us the most accelerated period of socio-economic development in the history of man. The invention of the steam engine in 1775 kicked it all off. But that has come at a huge price. Steph talked about enslavement, in unequal societies, pollution, greenhouse gas emissions. There's all sorts of downsides to the Industrial Revolution that we now have the opportunity to right by managing what we do better. And we're going to need help to manage what we do better, because the decisions we need to take are so complex. And they are exacerbated by things like the Internet of Things, the hyperconnectivity that we're seeing with social networks, and the ability to get data from the world around us and then make sense of it. So AI will help us do that. I tend to think of it more as augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. It's going to help us figure out what the heck is going on around us and then make some decisions about optimizing the outcomes.
Well, I guess there's a couple of things, because we already use technology. We already augment ourselves with technology.
We sure
do.
do.
Obviously with the phones we use, but then also physically with pacemakers, hearing aids, prosthetics,
Glasses.
So for a long time we've been looking to make ourselves a little bit better with technology. So it doesn't really. It's not a massive surprise, and even though it's happening really quickly, it doesn't happen overnight. So it's not like we're going to wake up tomorrow and artificial intelligence is here. It will slowly, rapidly, but progressively integrate itself into our lives. So I think you're correct from that point of view. I have a question that, and I don't know how we answer it. 5 years ago, I was incredibly optimistic about where the world was going from a tech. I thought social media was bringing a level of transparency to business that had never existed, which was fantastic. Transparency to the world. I went there can only be positive things when we're moving in a transparent way. And so I was a little bit caught up in the hype of how awesome everything was going to be. And then we see, again, because you don't extend out the unintended consequences, and we had, Russia manipulating our social networks to make people think and do things that were convenient for them. So you've raised it. So we have the opportunity, we have the technology, or very close to having the technology with AI to right imbalances, to make it better. Do we have, Steph, the mental capacity to not cock it up again?
Neuroscientists talk about our brain as being the most fascinating object in the known universe. We don't yet know what our own brains are capable of. Now, if we look at what is happening in the world, if you look at a nation that can vote in Scrotus, as he's now called, not POTUS any longer, but a nation that can vote in somebody like Donald Trump says that the fear is making people want to go backwards. And we're seeing a lot of that conservatism is people are so terrified of what they think might go on in terms of human beings, that we're all going to be replaced, etc., that they're now going more and more conservative. If you look at a lot of the nationalism that is coming out of Europe is the same sort of thing. So I think out of the New World and out of Africa and out of Asia, we're going to see a lot of development, because the needs are very different in Africa and in Asia, where people aren't terrified of where we might go because they haven't come from where we've come from, where we think that this is the only way we can live in these industrialized societies, earning a living, and what if we lose everything? Because that's every middle class person's fear, is what if we lose everything, because we're 1 or 2 generations away from people who are poor, all of us. Now, if we look at then the future that's coming, that if we go right back to human beings, that hunter-gatherers literally spent, and this is research talking about, they spent about 32 to 40% of their time on survival issues. So that was hunting, gathering, men hunted, women hunted, men gathered. It's not as binary as it's made out to be.
But most of your time was spent
most
not
of your
dying.
time was spent, 30 to 40% of your time was on survival issues.
Yes.
60 to 70% of your time was spent being human. So we spent much more time living, we spent much more time loving. That's why we got to have, they're our ancestors. And so human beings were allowed to live in a much more, they were far freer. That life was harder and life was brutal, but brutal in a different way. It's possible that artificial intelligence could get us back to that, where we can spend a lot more time living and loving and being human and being helping each other more. So being in service to one another in all manner of ways. And artificial intelligence can push us to ask better questions, to think about life differently without our own human biases. So we can think about things differently. We can puzzle over things differently. We can find new solutions given how we're being pushed by artificial intelligence to think about our existences differently. And I think AI is going to make us a lot better as human beings.
So it's essentially all we've trained our brains to do in the last 200 years of the Industrial Revolution is to
be slaves.
Yeah, and process data capture and do mundane things. So okay, so where you're coming from is let's put this in service to people, so we can free up. We can do the amazing things we potentially have to do, or can do, or possibly could do. But that then begs the question: is where are we actually, Simon, with with artificial intelligence. I mean, we hear Elon Musk has said that, well, he's more on the cautious, conservative side of AI, and he thinks his direct quote is, we're summoning the demon by driving ahead, and he says we're sort of 5 to 10 years away of having AI that's at the level of human intelligence. Others are hyping it, where I think there are some people who are developing a little macro and a little bit of an algorithm and saying, look, we're using the latest AI technology, and we're definitely at the high point of this of the hype cycle on this. But where are we where is the technology actually?
Yeah.
I mean, narrow AI, yes, we can beat games, we can do that sort of thing, but the general artificial intelligence, where are we?
So I think you mentioned hype cycles, and you mentioned Musk weighing in on the fact that this stuff could be the most dangerous thing we've ever done, and the late great Stephen Hawking had a very similar opinion. And AI isn't new. It's been around well over 50 years in various guises, and we've had the notion of these 3 AI winters, where there were these flurries of promise and the world was going to change, and then it didn't quite work out like that, and it was back to the drawing board. And we may yet go back to the drawing board, you never know. But I think what has changed, and what is making AI more technically viable now, is we've spent the last 25 years building the internet. So we now have an infrastructure that allows us to connect up more things and more people. And that's important because that connectivity gives us the ability to gather more data. And that's important because much of AI is predicated on having these big sets of data that we can actually use to train the models, whether we do unsupervised training, reinforced training, or supervised training of these models. We have a lot more going for us in terms of the underlying technology that makes it all technically feasible in a way that it wasn't technically feasible in the past. What we look at is we say, now that we have these capabilities, what are some of the exciting things that we can do? And Steph mentioned, in Africa, we're not coming necessarily from the same past as the West and North America. And one of the things that excites me is as we get smarter at things like natural language processing, we are able to take this technology and bring people into the fold who today may be excluded because they're illiterate. So they can't use the keyboard that's sitting in front of you that you use today to interact. But what if they could talk to a system in their own language? And we're getting to that point where we can start to do that.
And what with real-time translation, if we could talk to each other.
Exactly.
So instead of having to learn vocab, I'm trying to learn an African language at the moment, and vocab is very complex at my age. And if I could actually just have a dictionary in my brain, for example, which is a real-time translator, we could all communicate with one another. But even if you look at in Africa, for example, once people can read, which is coming, there's the Elon Musk and Peter Diamandis are putting out that X Prize, the X Prize will be launched next year in terms of teaching African children, teaching themselves to read on tablets that are provided. So suddenly this technology is in every African person's hand and powered by Google is providing the tablets and
between Google, Facebook and the others, the whole world is going to have internet access. So
all of that now, when African people, everybody in Africa or everybody in the world can actually read, and just with the intelligence that we have, that they can access the world's repository of information. When you've got continents that have got massive needs like Africa and Asia, what do you think is going to happen? There's going to be this explosion of creativity of people solving their own problems with highly appropriate solutions and technology. Now you add artificial intelligence to that in 10, 15 years' time, and there's a lot of talk about just an industrialized Africa will eradicate poverty on this continent in one generation. Now add AI to that, and in 20 years' time, what are we looking at? We're looking at a totally different world where we can take those human values of people who are Asian and people who are African, where human beings are the most important criteria. Your values value human beings over and above individuality, money and profit, as we do in the Western world. And where's that going to take our humanity? Into a totally different place. So that's what excites me as to how technology, AI, just even what we've got right now, how that's going to release a totally different form of human potential that it will unleash creativity second to none, where we're looking at solutions of people who don't have to unlearn. Alvin Toffler said when he wrote Future Shock in 1970, Footsack, whenever it was, that we'd have to unlearn and all of that. Yes, we have to as Westerners to come up with new solutions, but we've got two continents of people who won't have to unlearn because they're going to come up with such innovative solutions anyway, and naturally we may have to unlearn to be able to appreciate those solutions and go, wow, that really can take us forward. So
it's a very hard thing to imagine something you've never seen, and that's in large measure I think what we struggle with is, which is why we revert back to our default, which is fear. To be fearful of things we can't see, and it is remarkable. We will do things, and we see this in business all the time. We see it in life all the time. People will have a preference to do things that don't work just because it's comfortable and they understand it. They know it's rubbish, but it's like, well, at least it's better than the thing I don't know.
That's because we've gotten into the habit.
Correct.
When we first adopted computers, for example, we had was it a single floppy or a dual floppy? I know men don't like to talk about floppies. But when we had the first computers, we were very enthusiastic about adopting those. The difficulty was when we had to go from those old DOS-based programs to a Windows. Oh, what's going on now?
Yes.
We don't like to change those habits. When we changed from maps in our motor cars to GPSs, wow, that's exciting. But as soon as there's changes in those systems, our habits go, it's not how it used to be. And even from PCs to laptops was a big issue. What did that allow us in terms of working differently? Do bosses like today? Do they like their staff to work at home? No, still not. Although their staff are probably more productive at home where they're uninterrupted, or could be without interruptions. Technology's made these things possible. We can adopt, and we do adopt, but we don't like to change our habits once we've adopted.
But now you see, that's the area that starts to concern me in terms of how we do certain things, because it requires a complete thinking of things in completely new ways.
Yes.
And when we're talking about technology, AI, I had a conversation from somebody from a very large consulting firm, and digital transformation is number one on that's their big priority. And he's a German guy, and we were having a conversation, and his view of all of this was, digital transformation it's efficiency and cost, and that was, and it I was taken aback, because he goes, surely your view has to be greater than that, because efficiency and cost, that's what we did for 200 years in the Industrial Revolution. It was all about how many more widgets can we squeeze out per hour, per process, and my fear is we're going to run into this. And Simon, you're enthusiastic about it. Steph, you're enthusiastic. I'm enthusiastic about it. But this is efficiency and cost, and we're going to run into all these old world things. Are we going to have the momentum, are we going to overcome all of this?
So he's not wrong.
Yes.
That efficiency and cost is an important part of the conversation, but it's an and conversation. It's efficiency and cost, which I would tend to look at as a sustaining innovation. So how do we take these technologies and do what we already do better, more cheaply, taking the drudgery out for people and so forth. But then let's turn as well and look at the disruptive innovations that we can bring. You have to organize your organization to do both. You can't throw the baby out the bathwater and say this, in any organization that's producing a return for its shareholders today, or any government that's providing some services to its citizens today, has to keep doing that, certainly for some foreseeable future. But at the same time, we have to start exploring, experimenting, and thinking about what could we do differently that we're not doing today. And that's not necessarily about efficiency and cost. That's about better experiences. That's about tapping human empathy and creativity.
But that's where diversity is important.
Hugely.
Because if we don't have diversity, we stick with the German model of efficiency
Yeah.
and cost. And so the diversity and the nature of globalization brings that in, as long as we don't force efficiency and cost on the rest of the world. Now, that's the advantage of the rest of the world not necessarily being industrialized to the same degree right now, because we have then much more diversity in our thinking, and we look at, why are we doing this anyway? Why are we doing efficiency and cost? We're doing efficiency and cost because the economics model that we live by, called capitalism, means growth has to be at the center. We know that's not sustainable. So if you look at then a diverse view of the well-being economy, for example, is Lorenzo Fioramonte, who's talking about care being at the center. Now that's a very different economy. That brings a huge diversity. That totally and utterly chucks out efficiency and cost as the right way of doing things. Because it's a totally different way of being. So one of the things that Sapiens, the author of Sapiens, asked is Harari, and he asks, because we can have a say in the future, we need to ask this very complicated question, which is not what do we want as human beings. That's a different question from what do we want to want. Now, that's a very different question.
It's much more philosophical, isn't it?
In terms of the future.
Yeah.
So what do we want for the next 50 years?
Yeah.
Are there enough conversations going on about that? I mean, because the way...
No, because we're all too busy with efficiency
Exactly.
and cost.
Well, that's exactly my point. Is like, okay, we're rushing headlong, and one of the biggest consulting firms in the world. And I agree with you. Efficiency and cost are important. I also agree with you
until we get through capitalism.
Well, you see, you mentioned the thing of the business and the responsibility to shareholders. In my mind, that's a fundamental model that has to shift and change.
Yes.
I think it will.
And because if we
hold
look
on,
already...
hold on. He's just said something. Why do you think it... No, this is important.
It is very.
Why do you think it will?
Because, it hasn't been around that long. It was a system that worked reasonably well in the precursors to the Industrial Revolution and the Industrial Revolution. But if you think about the fact that we are going to add this additional 4 billion people onto this tiny little planet, on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have all these new capabilities that are starting to allow us to go back, as Steph says, go back to being human. Then maybe nirvana is a world where the machines do all the production for us, and we sit back and become humans again. Do the loving, do the dancing around the fire, do whatever it is that we want to do that's truly human, and let machines plow and live. Because we're here for a very short space of time, and even if the folks at Singularity University are right, and that short period of time becomes 150 years rather than the 3 score and 10,
really short.
It's still very, very short, as you say, and I would love it if I didn't have to work. I absolutely would love it if I could go and do the stuff, learn to paint and read and spend more time with my friends and my family.
Well,
and maybe this technology, it's kind of driven by almost a genetic impulse that we want to get back there, and let's get this technology to get us there.
Well, I guess, okay, well, on the positive side of things, and I think there's a couple of things, as I do believe people like Elon Musk, Peter Diamandis, there are powerful people in this world who are driving for a proper change, and they want to see this thing. And the irony is, on the one hand, Elon's saying let's stay away from artificial intelligence. On the other, he's espoused the view of a universal basic income, where it says, like, you know what, let's let the AI, the machines, and the robots do all the work. And we will drive the world's economy by leisure. We will just go and live. We'll travel, we'll engage. And we'll
look at why people want to be wealthy. They want to be wealthy because then you're at the top of the pile, and the more that you are at the top of the pile, the more leisure time you have.
Yes.
When you are poor, you have no leisure time whatsoever. You're working all the time. You're either working for somebody else or you're working at home. So that's what we want as human beings. The worst crisis came after all the industrial revolutions, etc. We're not talking about the fourth industrial revolution, but the worst crisis came after the Second World War. And consumerism started to pay for the war. It was totally and utterly manipulated by big business to literally pay for the war and the war effort and all the huge cost of war. Now, if prior to that human beings didn't believe tomorrow would be better than today, They didn't believe in credit and living on credit and hope. The only reason credit exists is because we think tomorrow will be better, so we can take out a loan today and pay it back. We hope tomorrow.
We can take a
half the people in
future.
South Africa can't, but that's another discussion altogether. So once we can stop with the consumerism, which is just nonsense, because that's what's putting such pressure on our planet. That's on our planet, what's putting such pressure on this growth, and this unsustainable growth, and all the plastic that is in our world. Why? We don't need any more plastic. We can recycle. We can do all of these things. So all of the whole history that's gotten us into this crisis can be totally relieved by AI, which has gotten us to where we want to be, is because we want to be at the top of the pile so we can have more leisure time.
Okay, cool. So
and that's why I don't think this digital revolution should be seen as, people talk about the fourth industrial revolution, they talk about industry 4.0. The danger in that mindset is that we look at this stuff as just making what we've already done faster and
more
cheaper.
industry.
Yes.
And we're at a real inflection point here. If we're smart, we will use this digital revolution to completely transform how societies work, how business works, and how we live on this planet. And that's the exciting stuff.
Now, when I grew up in the 70s, I was the tail end of the hippies, and we were told all of these ideas that you have are just completely and utterly idealistic. What technology, AI, whatever you like to call it, is going to do for us is allow us to create those ideals that we wanted in terms of the anti-authoritarian movement of the hippies that was started against Vietnam, etc. What was it about? It was about people living freely and about people allowing ourselves to be human beings, and this is what technology potentially makes possible.
Indeed.
It's about what do we want to want? What do we think our children would want? What do we think our grandchildren, those that have or want or whatever, what would they want? What society would they want to create? We're already seeing younger people, which is why I like them so. Lots of people complain about millennials and Generation Z and whatever. I really like them because they have these same ideals. They don't want to live this way. They don't want to sacrifice themselves to the corporation and be slaves their whole lives. That was in my father's generation, which was the post-war generation that thought that was noble. So we've got this great thing called this incredible mind. Our brain is what likes habits because it goes on that go slow because of it's a real resource thief. So our brain resorts to habits, which is where conservatism comes from. What are we trying to conserve? So when people talk about, well, I'm really conservative, what are you trying to conserve? What is of such value that we need to conserve it, that we've created already? I'm not sure there's that much. So when we talk about the mind likes newness, the mind likes the excitement, the mind needs stimulation, the mind hates being bored. So we've got this constant push me, pull you in our own selves even between. We want to conserve, we want to move forward, we want to do this, we want to change, we don't want to change our habits, it's too much effort, etc. But I think we can inspire people sufficiently with what machines can do for us to then make us not bring out our hyperhuman skills, but make us hyperhuman in terms of empathy and care and concern for one another and going and doing the things, what makes us happy, not working on a machine. What makes us happy is making a difference.
Okay.
So as soon as we go somewhere and we make a difference, we feel good. Let's do more of that.
So that, as we sort of come to the end of this discussion on AI, artificial intelligence in the future, what is the big takeout from this? So we've spent the last 30 or so minutes chatting about it. So what? What should be the takeout from this conversation for all of us, Simon?
So for me, the takeout is the potential. We're standing at a point in time now where we're kind of wiring our planet up. We are developing science and technologies that can serve us. I think I don't think Elon Musk is against AI per se. I think what he's saying is that we need to be careful that we turn it to our service, that we are having conversations around the ethics and the morality. And one of the things we can't do is move forward with the same levels of inequality in this world that we have today.
Yes.
And the danger is that if AI becomes a tool for those who already have and it further disenfranchises those who don't have, that's where there's a massive danger for societies around the world. So I think the real issue is here. We need to be having these kind of conversations on a broad front about how do we make this stuff serve us? How do we make this stuff help us be more human?
And I think the only risk in terms of the takeout, the risk that is part of what you're saying, is this power model of leadership that we have, where leadership means I have power over. I can order you to do, because I'm in charge of your salary, I can tell you what to do. And we've got to overcome this model of hierarchy and power that we have in our society, because that's where the dangers come in terms of morality and ethics. Because if it's power-based, then I can skew it and I can manipulate it so that I can actually do then a Hitler or a Donald Trump or whoever around this, to actually then use it to subjugate people rather than to elevate
Uplift
people
them, yeah.
and give us this more egalitarian society. So I think that we cannot have AI and AI benefit us while we still believe in this authoritarian model of leadership that we have in our world. We first have to start diluting that, where we have this class system, which is the caste system, which is the same, and it's called classism now, or in terms of the wealthy having power over everybody else. Why? Why does having wealth, because we were privileged, give us any more human rights than somebody who doesn't have it? So if we can use it to start changing the models that really haven't served us as human beings, all human beings, I think we can then create this world that has far more of an egalitarian world, where we can truly find each other interesting, rather than we can collaborate rather than compete, because the model is based on competition, and that's where it goes wrong.
All right, cool. Well, I guess then my take on this is, and coming out from this, is that AI, artificial intelligence, has got to be a tool of humanity rather than industry.
Yes.
And you've highlighted a great, because it's a great buzzword, Industry 4.0, the fourth industrial revolution. And honestly, I think it's bullshit. I do think I think it's a bad way to frame it. And it starts because technology is now in service of industry, and that's where we've gone wrong. If we bring technology into service of humanity, we have a greater chance. So I guess it's up to people like you, Steph, and you. I mean, you're in industry. You're part of. I was nearly very.
You're going to say we're part of the problem. We're part of the solution.
Absolutely, but you have to look. Any large corporate has been part of the problem, but it's come out of a way of thinking, and you've gotten to where you are. When I say you, the SAP has gotten to where it has through industry, but now there's a great opportunity to do amazing things. And from what you're describing here, I think you're already involved in it. And then Steph, people like I guess you and to a degree me, we're sort of more loners, in terms of we're not part of the great corporates, but we can have influence with the people we interact with, and forcing conversations like this and having these conversations and pushing the agenda along, because I do think there is great reason to be positive. There are amazing things that come. I'm
enormously excited
excellent.
about it.
And
about
we should
the future.
And we shouldn't be distracted by the Donald Trumps, and because these are temporary things. These are, yes. And there will always be obstacles that get in our way. There will be always things that happen where it seems like we're going backwards. But the pure audaciousness of human nature, I don't think will allow us to go back. We're at a point we have no right to, but yet we are going, you know what, we're going to colonize the solar system, we're going to go to another planet. And I mean, just the audacious craziness of it is amazing. And I think that's, if we take that forward,
human history is all about progress.
Absolutely.
And this is just maybe accelerating that progress.
Fantastic.
In a better way.
And it's been about progress for the few, and now we have to put it in service in terms of progress for the many.
Yeah.
And
for everybody.
Yeah. What can we achieve?
Great.
What can we as human beings achieve? That is left entirely to our imagination.
Great stuff. Well, listen, Simon Carpenter of SAP, Steph Vermeulen, thank you very much for taking the time to engage in this conversation. I've enjoyed it, and hopefully others will too. And I think we're hopefully part of the positive conversation in all of this going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.